The committee also invited former Attorney General Lynch, former FBI Director Comey, and former Director McCabe, Deputy Director McCabe, to testify today. Mr. McCabe's lawyer wrote that his client would rely on his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination to avoid answering any questions here today. Mr. Comey's attorney tells us he's out of the country, although I saw he was in Iowa over the weekend. According to his Twitter feed, he seems to be having a wonderful time. This is the second time since he was fired that Mr. Comey refused an invitation to testify here voluntarily. He has time for book tours and television interviews, but apparently no time to assist this committee, which has primary jurisdiction over the Justice Department. Ms. Lynch also chose not to show up. The need for transparency does not end when senior officials are fired or quit.
Error of judgment, serious error of judgment, extremely poor judgment, and a gross lack of professionalism. Now, these are conclusions that were drawn, respectively, about the conduct of former Attorney General of the United States, the former director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and FBI special agents assigned to one of the highest profile investigations in the Bureau's history. In my opinion, this is appalling, and the significance of these findings cannot be overstated. The report identifies missteps at every level of the Department of Justice, from our nation's chief federal law enforcement officer to special agents in the field. Director Wray, I have to say that I was disappointed by your response last week to the Inspector General report. And while you admitted that the report found errors of judgment, you took pains to emphasize that the report focused on, quote, a small number of FBI employees, unquote. Well, let's remember who that small number of employees was. The director of the FBI, the deputy director of the FBI, the leader of both the Clinton email investigation and the Russia investigation. These were not junior field agents. These were senior agency officials. They were running two of the most important investigations in the Bureau's history. And they were insubordinate, grossly unprofessional in their communications, and even untruthful. So let's not pretend like this was some one-off problem. There is a serious problem with the culture at FBI headquarters. Your statement last week seemed to suggest we shouldn't worry too much about the events detailed in the Inspector General report because the report focuses on a small group of individuals and events. Well, I think that's exactly backwards. If we can look at only one or two investigations and find this much bias and unprofessionalism, I can only imagine what else is out there and what the Inspector General found about the conduct of senior Bureau leadership. I'd have to say he found out that it would certainly, in my opinion, be damning.
Would you say that this investigation was done by the book?
Hard to say what by the book is.
Well, who wrote this book? If this was done by the book, who wrote it?
I think there are reasons to raise questions on certain of these steps and decisions.
I think you did a good job, but the whole idea that this is normal, folks, there's nothing here normal. I don't want you to think the FBI does this day in and day out. This is not normal. Now, I think that's what you tried to find.
Yeah.
Do you believe it's pretty clear to everybody in the country by July the 5th that Donald Trump was the presumptive nominee of the Republican Party?
That's my recollection. And from the
Since
text,
the
it's
convention
pretty
was on
clear.
the 18th. Yeah.
Right. And the texts, I think, reflect that as well.
Okay, I'm going to read this text message from Paige to Strzok on August the 8th, after he'd gotten the nomination. She says, Trump's not ever going to become president, right? Right? Strzok responded, no, he's not. We'll stop it. Now, I don't know how you feel about that. That's pretty unnerving. Strzok, wasn't he the lead investigator of the Clinton email investigation?
He was, in essence, the lead investigator.
Okay, so the head guy looking at Clinton on August the 8th says we got to stop Trump. Now, was that just idle talk? A week later, here's what they say to each other. Strzok text message to Lisa Page. I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office, that there's no way he gets elected, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40. Now, that's a week later. Who's Andy?
Our understanding, it was Andy McCabe, the deputy director.
So you got the deputy director meeting with the lead investigator of the Clinton email investigation, and Miss Page, who's involved somehow, meeting in Andy's office discussing taking out an insurance policy to make sure Donald Trump doesn't become president? Is that what you're telling us?
I'll be clear, I can't speak to whether Mr. McCabe was there or not.
Did you ask Mr. McCabe?
We did. He said he was not. He did not recall.
So one of them's lying. So I want you to reopen this investigation and come back and tell us, do you believe Strzok or do you believe McCabe? Because you just told me the deputy director of the FBI says he's not the Andy.
Oh, just to be clear, they're talking about a conversation in his office.
Yeah.
He is stating he does not recall whether he was there or not. And neither of those individuals are putting him in the middle of their conversation.
All I'm saying is that the Andy's office where this occurred, he wasn't there. What did Strzok? Did Strzok say he was there?
Strzok says he was there.
Well, somebody's lying. So anyway, we'll figure that out later. None of this is normal, folks. Let's look at the actual interview itself. How many people were involved in the Clinton interview on July the 2nd?
There were, I believe, 6 or 8 people present, but 2 agents conducting the interview.
So as I understand it, there were 2 agents and 2 prosecutors.
Correct.
Okay. Now, this was an email sent in February 2016 from Page to McCabe. Hey, you've surely already considered this, but in my view, our best reason to hold the line at 2 and 2, 2 agents and 2 prosecutors, is she might be our next president. How did you feel about that?
We were concerned about it, and we lay out here why we were concerned.
Okay, let's keep talking about this interview. One of the FBI agents in the interview said on Election Day to another FBI agent, you should know that I'm with her. Now, her was Clinton, right?
Correct.
How you feel about that?
Very concerned.
Okay, eventually very concerned gets to be enough already. I'm very concerned. You know, I'm glad I don't text an email. That's one thing I'm glad I don't do. But have you ever proved a case by circumstantial evidence, Director Wray?
Yes.
Well, I'm going to write you a letter and talk about why you should reconsider your findings as to whether or not it affected the investigation. Here's what Miss Page said on March the 4th, 2016. God, Trump is a loathsome human. How you feel about that? I mean, she's entitled to her opinion.
I think we've laid out here why we were so concerned about it.
Well, when you add it all up, as early as March, these people hated Trump, and this investigation was anything but by the book. And at the end of the day, what Comey did just blows me away as much as it does y'all. And I can't believe that this happened to my FBI. I told you the story, Mr. Wray, Director Wray, about wanting to be part of the organization, and y'all were smart enough not to take me. The bottom line is, if you're on our side of the aisle, this really does hit you hard. And we can't just write it off. I think there was a lot of bias that did affect an investigation that is, to me, almost impossible to explain using any standard that I grew up with as a prosecutor or even as a defense attorney. This is Strzok to Page on October the 20th. Trump is an effing idiot. The bottom line is, I'm glad you found what you found, Mr. Horowitz. I'm not buying that the Clinton email investigation was on the up and up. And the reason I'm not buying it is because the 2 people intimately involved. One, the guy, the lead investigator, clearly did not want to see Donald Trump become president of the United States. Finally, do you agree with me that finding her liable criminally would be inconsistent with stopping Donald Trump? If they found Hillary Clinton was criminally liable, that paves the way for Donald Trump. Can you put those two things together?
I guess it would depend when, but yes, I
How
could
about
see
July,
conceivably
a
it
week
could.
before the convention?
Oh, it clearly could conceivably.
Well, not only clearly conceivably, that's exactly what's happening here, folks. You cannot hold her criminally liable and stop him. As to the law, why did they change gross negligence in the original statement, Director Wray, to reckless disregard?
I think I would defer to the Inspector General who looked into that.
Why did they do that?
The explanation was that,
Can I just suggest something?
yeah,
Gross negligent is a criminally liable standard.
correct.
So if they had said it the way they originally wrote it, she's guilty of a crime, and the reason they changed it is because she's not guilty of a crime, and if you want to stop him, it can't be gross negligence. What's the difference between reckless disregard and gross negligence?
Not much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for being here today. These are difficult days in the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Both the Bureau and the Department have long, decades-long, in the Department's case, centuries-long traditions of fair and impartial administration of justice. There are thousands of good and honorable men and women that work at the Bureau, that work at the Department of Justice. And yet their integrity has been called into question by misconduct and political bias at the highest levels. On May 3rd, 2017, then Director Comey testified before this committee that he had, quote, never, and never was his words, been an anonymous source in any news matters related to the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation. He further testified in response to questioning from the chairman that he had not ever authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in news reports about the Trump investigation or the Clinton administration. He answered simply and categorically no. Now, in contrast to that, former Deputy Director McCabe has stated that Director Comey was aware of his leaking to the press. Moreover, his lawyer says he has email records that demonstrated Director Comey was aware of his leaking to the press all during the time it was happening. Both of their statements cannot be true. It is not possible, logically, for Director Comey to be telling the truth and for former Deputy Director McCabe to be telling the truth. So, Director Wray, tell us, which one is telling the truth to the best of your knowledge?
Senator, unfortunately, I can't answer that question because of an ongoing matter.
Is the FBI in possession of the emails referred to by Mr. McCabe of the Deputy Director being aware of and authorizing leaks to the press?
The same answer, unfortunately.
Let me ask you, Mr. Gray, how seriously would the FBI treat the matter of the Director of the FBI perjuring himself before the Senate Judiciary Committee?
Well, Senator, as the current director of the FBI testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee, I take the obligation to tell the truth extremely seriously, and I would expect our organization to do so as well.
Well, I would hope you would take as seriously the fidelity to law of prior directors. And one or the other is not telling the truth. I don't know which one is telling the truth and which one is lying, but if there are email indicia that either demonstrate Deputy Director McCabe was telling the truth or Director Comey was telling the truth, this committee and the American people need to know. And simply saying an ongoing investigation means we'll never know who lied to this committee. That's not acceptable, I believe, either to this committee or to the American people.
Well, Senator, one of the central takeaways from the Inspector General's report that's at issue today is the importance of following long-established norms in the department, which includes commenting on pending matters in front of Congress or otherwise publicly. And so I don't believe that it would be appropriate for me, no matter how tempted I might be to answer your question, to deviate from those norms in one of my first acts as director.
Director Wray, let me understand which pending matter you're referring to. The Clinton email matter is closed, is that correct?
Yes.
There's no allegation that this is under the scope of the special counsel. This has nothing to do with Russia collusion or anything else. This is a question of did the director of the FBI perjure himself to this committee? That's not within special counsel Mueller's jurisdiction, is it?
Whether the director of the FBI, I don't know what's fully within the scope of special counsel.
Well,
Mueller's
you're declining to answer a question because you
Right.
say there's an ongoing
Right, and I
investigation.
can't-
I'm trying to understand what investigation arguably covers the emails demonstrating whether or not the director of the FBI committed perjury.
And I can't answer that question without describing an ongoing investigation.
So it's your position you're not going to describe any investigation, but you'll decline to answer any questions because there might be some investigation that might implicate it?
No, what I'm testifying to is that the questions you're asking, I know for a fact, implicate matters that I can't describe without implicating an ongoing investigation.
All right, let's shift to Mr. Horowitz. Let's go a little bit deeper into the issue you brought up with Senator Coons about the potential of bias in the investigation. Your conclusion was that the agents involved in the conduct, quote, brought discredit to themselves, sowed doubt about the FBI's handling of the investigation, and impacted the reputation of the FBI. There were approximately 15 full-time agents and analysts staffed on this investigation. Is that correct?
I don't, as I sit here, I'm not sure the exact number. It could well have been that number. It was a lot and probably around that number.
And Deputy Assistant Director Peter Strzok was assigned to the investigation in August of 2015 and was placed in charge of supervising the day-to-day operations.
My understanding is he was, in essence, the leading the investigation.
So the agent leading the investigation, is it true that during the period of the investigation in late 2015 and in 2016, when Mr. Strzok was in charge, he used an FBI device to call President Trump a, quote, effing idiot, although I don't believe he abbreviated it, a loathsome human, and a disaster?
Correct.
Did he also say multiple times that Donald Trump, quote, cannot be president?
Correct.
And on August 6, 2016, when FBI counsel Lisa Page said to Strzok that, quote, maybe you're meant to stay where you are because you're meant to protect the country from that menace, meaning President Trump, did Mr. Strzok reply that I can protect our country at many levels?
He did.
And 2 days later, when counsel Lisa Page asked Mr. Strzok whether Donald Trump would ever become president, did Strzok reply, quote, no, he's not, will stop it?
Correct.
And is it true that there are many similar statements by Mr. Strzok in the report?
That's correct. And indeed, you could go on to August 15, 7 days later, which was of concern to us as well, referencing an insurance policy.
Now, according to the report, beyond Mr. Strzok and Lisa Page, there were at least 3 other FBI employees involved in the Hillary Clinton email investigation that showed animus. For example, they called President Trump an effing idiot, again, and they called his supporters a slur for the intellectually disabled that I won't repeat in this committee. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Does any of that conduct give one confidence in fairness or impartiality in the enforcement of justice?
I think it undercuts confidence, precisely as we said.
Just seemed to be a culture of impunity where the rules did not apply to the director and his leadership team, but obviously were designed to apply to everybody else.